Thank you very much for tuning in to That Will Never Work podcast. Everyone talks about finding their voice. But what if the real power comes from learning how to tell your story? And today's episode, Sara Lohse breaks down the art of storytelling for thought leaders who are ready to turn their message into influence. And we'll talk about it right after this.
Educate, empower, enable, impact. Thank you for tuning in to That Will Never Work, an award-winning podcast where we share inspiring information and personal experiences related to business and the entrepreneurial journey from those who are leaders in their respective field. Now, here's your host, author and business coach, Maurice.
I thank you very much for tuning in. So we're going to get all the way into the weeds, Sara. And I just have to ask everyone this real quick. What if the only thing standing between you and the audience, your mental impact, is how you're telling your story? And there's a story that Sara shares in a podcast. Like I said, Sara, we're going to get all the way into the weeds real quick.
Oh, goodness.
You talk about how you got a tattoo about a pianist, right?
Did you say pianist, like piano?
Is that what you said, pianist?
That is not what I said.
What did you say?
It was far less classy.
Well, but again, here's the thing though, right? Even in that little mix-up, there's a story in that, right?
Everything happens for a story.
Right. So can you explain to us how can we tell a story even in a misunderstanding perspective that we might not see that there might not be any value in that? How can we even pull something value out of even a misstep?
I love that question, and there are about 4,008 ways that I can answer that. But for me, so I accidentally got a tattoo of a penis, not a pianist. There was no Mozart involved when I was on a solo trip to Ireland. And that is a stupid little mistake story I would tell at a bar when bartending to like get sympathy tips back in college. And that's really all I thought that story was. And then fast forward a couple years, I am at a podcast conference. I'm producing a podcast for the first time. I am trying to pitch the host of the show I'm producing, who was my CEO at the time. I'm trying to pitch to get him booked as a guest. I had never pitched before. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I go to the host of Stacking Benjamins, which is a amazing award-winning finance podcast. And I just kind of word vomit at this poor man, Joe High. And I'm like, yeah, Eric is an expert in this, this, and this. And he's got these letters after his name. And you have to have him on a show because he's an expert. And Joe just looks at me. He's like, yeah, I don't need an expert. I need someone with a cool story. And I didn't want the conversation to end there, but I didn't know what to say. So what came out was, do you want to hear about the time I got a tattoo of a penis while I was in Ireland? And he did.
Wow.
And I accidentally got myself booked on an award-winning finance podcast to tell that story. And it was really funny because I didn't think there was value in that story other than, I always think there's value in making someone laugh and it's a funny story. So that's what I would tell it for. But the way that he interviewed me it was his job to pull value out for his audience. So he interviewed me in a way that turned this story into something I didn't really see before. And I didn't realize so many pieces of my life that fell together after that trip. And the trip was this amazing experience of being alone in a new country, of finding my voice, figuring out I could do things by myself, building that confidence, getting out of the bad relationships, getting out of the bad jobs, and just kind of finding myself. And the tattoo was just meant to be a souvenir. So I have this experience, and then it ends with like oh crap, now I have a tattoo of a penis on my arm for everyone to see. But he interviews me so artfully that he pulls all of that value out and has me talking about the way that this experience changed my life. So I learned on the spot how to tell a good story. And it kind of taught me that whole concept of there's a quote by Ira Glass that great stories happen to those who can tell them.
Mm. Mhm.
And it's so true. So now it's just a matter of changing the way we look at those stories and changing the way we look at value and
Mhm.
what value is and what like is hidden in these little experiences and how other people can relate to them.
So what would you say is the true value in a situation like that? Because as you said, you were young, you were adventurous, right? You just did it by accident, quote unquote, right? Because it was a souvenir.
Mhm.
But what I mean by the accident is you accidentally created a lane out of this situation, right? So
Yep.
you had no idea that this one event was going to change your life.
Yep.
So how can you turn what perceived as an accident into a life-changing situation?
It's exactly what Ira Glass said. It's great stories happen to those who can tell them. And I think people kind of misunderstand storytelling in
Mhm.
general and stories. And when we say, like, oh, tell a story or what's your story, our brains automatically go to our like childhood trauma story, our like big sensational stories, the ones that we would hear about on the news, the ones that are headline worthy.
Mhm.
And those stories are great, but those stories aren't relatable. If you're to tell your like childhood trauma story, you can kind of pull at heartstrings and get people to see a little bit behind the curtain,
Mhm.
but they haven't gone through that too a lot
Mhm.
of the time. Like a lot of the times the one thing that people have that is unique is the bad crap they've been through.
Right, right.
But if you look at the little stories, like the everyday little mess ups and failures and successes, that's what's relatable.
Mhm.
So, has everybody gone and gotten a tattoo of a penis on their arm on a solo trip to Ireland? No. But has everyone been in their 20s in a dead end relationship and a dead end
Mhm.
job trying to find more for their life? Yes.
Mhm.
Has everyone like traveled and wanted to bring home a souvenir? Probably.
Mhm.
Like there's little pieces that we can look at that become relatable. And we've all like there's my story has like heartbreak in it. It
Mhm.
has breakups, it has career changes, it has moves across the country. It has all these little aspects that everyone can relate to in some way. We've all
Mm.
had that breakup in our 20s that we thought was going to kill us.
Right.
We've all had that first job that we weren't valued for like our potential and the work we were doing
Mhm.
because we were young. Like we all have that.
Right.
So when we talk about those pieces, the little stories start to become more and more important because they touch people, they relate to
Mhm.
people, and people just want to connect to other people.
But sometimes we're not taught how to value the little things, right? And even with that, the true background for that moment, right? So right now you're telling us how yes, you took this solo trip, right? Or even just the little slightest thing, how I started off by saying you had a tattoo of a pianist, right? But understand what is the motive behind that? What is the background behind that, right? And so it gets you to start to talk about your story, right? And in that, now you're like, well, why would she talk about a pianist? Why would she have piano keys or now you're saying, hey, you know what? It's something else, right?
Something
So
else completely.
so I think what happens is that sometimes we don't understand the true background of that. We as the ones that wants to tell the story, right?
Mhm.
We don't understand the true value in that because we're never taught that. We think it's just, oh, we just tripped up the steps, not realizing we didn't pay attention, but there's a message in that as well. So how can we start to value all the other little pieces that we appear that are not as important but are important to the story?
Yeah, I think part of it, so when we think about telling stories, a lot of the times I think we start backwards
Mm-hmm.
and we start with the story. And it's
Mm.
this happened to me in my life. This was a huge moment. This is a story I want to tell. And we almost try to force the message into it.
Mm.
And I've seen this a lot actually. I judged a speaking competition about a year or two ago. And they had to tell a story. That was the rule.
Mhm.
And then it had to relate back to some message. And every single person told their biggest, most traumatic story and then summed it up with a message that I'm like, where's the connection? How that's what you meant by that? What is like that childhood trauma
Mhm.
relate to this is why you need a business coach?
Mm.
Like it doesn't fit. So instead, if we think about this is my message, this is what I want people to understand,
Mhm.
then we kind of work our way from there. Like, how did I learn that?
Mhm.
What was going on when I figured this out? What changed once I figured it out? And think more about the message itself because the story really is how you learned your message
Mm.
and everything around that. So instead of trying to take a story and relate it to a message, throw the story out.
Hmm.
Start with the message. And when you try to figure out if I had to teach myself this,
Mhm.
this is what I would say because this is how I learned it. So you're just sharing your experience leading up to learning that message and it's always going to be a story.
But sometimes it's easier to tell somebody what to do, right? And
Always.
tell them how to do it. And then now you're asking me to not only do that, but now I gotta turn the mirror and look back at, look at myself and try to interject my personal stuff into that.
Yep.
Sometimes, Sarah, that doesn't work for me. So why would I want to do that?
That's a hard question to answer too because a lot of people don't want to do that.
Right.
And it's hard. That's when you start having to become vulnerable and having
Mm.
to become authentic. And that's really hard. And something a lot of people say to me is like, I get it, like I need to do this, but
Mhm.
it's really hard for me to talk about myself.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to open up about this and let people see behind the curtain.
Mhm.
And I always kind of feel bad the way I say it because it kind of just always comes out with stop making it about you.
Mm.
But it's really true because if we stop making it about us, and instead of thinking like I'm telling this personal story and everyone's going to know this about me and I'm making this about me, I'm talking about myself and having it be very much centered around us,
Mhm.
that can be hard. But instead, think about the person who has to hear it
Mhm.
and think about like the person who has gone their whole life not realizing someone else has gone through the same situation and they can hear your story and feel seen or feel validated.
Hmm.
When we stop thinking about it as I'm telling my story so you know about me and
Mhm.
more of I'm telling my story so I can connect with you,
Hmm.
it it really changes the whole experience and it makes it about the person listening instead of about yourself.
So I'm a thought leader, right? And I hear all these profound speeches, all these things where people are standing up, standing ovations, people crying, things like that. But I feel like my story, it won't move anybody. It's just too simple. I don't want to tell nobody how I threw a rock across the water, skip it across the water. Like that's the most exciting thing in my life. At least that's the way I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how if I'm an aspiring thought leader, how do I even get to that point? Especially if that's the most I've ever done is skip a rock across on water.
Well, why are you skipping the rock?
I didn't have anything else to do. I was bored. Well, but see, that's the stuff.
What came out of it? What happened next?
Um, I started to challenge myself on skipping the next rock further.
And did that work?
Not the second time, not the third time, but maybe the fifth time.
Okay. And as someone listening,
Mhm.
how many times have I had to try something over because I wasn't good at it at first? And if I had stopped, or if you had stopped after that second rock, you wouldn't have known how much
Mhm.
farther you can go.
Right.
That's it's really looking at the whole situation.
Mhm.
And it's not it's funny because I've had people like the CEO I used to work for has said, "Why are you still talking about this stupid tattoo?" And it's because it's not about the tattoo anymore. I've
Right.
stood up on stages across the country and told that story,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not actually telling a story of getting a tattoo. I'm telling a story of learning how to tell stories
Mm-hmm.
and how I launched a company based on teaching other people to tell stories and how why I've been on podcasts and stages and all of this and how it all comes back to this one silly story I didn't find value in until later.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always about the story itself, it's about all the pieces around it. So you think the most exciting thing was that you just skipped a rock, but really you were learning persistence, you were
Mm-hmm.
learning perseverance, you were learning a new skill. If you can hone in on the little details like that, it becomes relatable. The most
Hmm.
important thing a story has to be is relatable.
So here's what happened with me using that example, Sarah. You asked me another thought-provoking question, which sometimes it was so simple. It wasn't even like, again, you didn't use any elaborate words, SAT words, right? You didn't do anything crazy, but it was just for me to take the next step or two. And sometimes we don't have that person to to just spread us out just a little bit. So
Mhm.
how can I do that if I don't have that individual in my life, or perceived that I don't have that individual in my life?
You become it. If you if there's something that like this is a story
Mm-hmm.
and that there's something there, it just kind of becomes your job to be that person. Ask yourself the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Really like tear it apart. Look at all the different pieces, look at all the different angles. I
Mm.
wouldn't have known that there was any value in that story if I didn't ask.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if no one's there to ask, then you just ask it to yourself. And I think people think that we have to elicit emotions. And that's
Hmm.
true. There's a few aspects of like a really compelling story that you need to have
Mm-hmm.
for that story to be compelling. And one of them is it's emotional.
Okay.
But we also forget that there is an entire spectra of
Hmm.
emotions. And sad is not the only one. And we forget that all the time. When we think like I need an emotional story, our brain always goes to something like traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's emotion in my story, but it's humor. It's like it's
Right.
levity, it's joy.
Right.
Like there are other emotions. And people don't remember what you say, they don't remember what you do, they remember how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
So people remember me as a speaker because I make them laugh. Because I do it in a way that I'm just relating to them. I'm telling them like, "Hey, I'm a human. I've made mistakes. I've gotten dumb tattoos
Mm-hmm.
on bar crawls and you probably have too. We've all been to college."
Right.
So we're able to connect on an emotional level even without making people sad.
Mm. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, as we're looking and we're hearing examples, right? You hear, oh, you know what? I had to pull myself up by the bootstraps.
Mhm.
I was, homeless, or I didn't have food, or all those type of things. So most people start off from a place that sounds sad, that sounds desolate or destitute or whatever it might be. Like, so you hear those type of stories, but if the worst thing I had was skipping this rock, because the creek was down the street from my house, because I lived in a middle class, space. Maybe I had both my parents or whatever. So I never had that mentality, right? Some of us have been in that space. I mean, I didn't live in that space, but those friends that I have, they have that story. They literally have that
Mhm.
story, and they don't find value even in a situation like that. And so I think that what you're providing is like, hey, you know what? Even in skipping that rock, there is something else that you learned. There's something else that happened that actually, in all reality, there's something that happened on that water that transformed your life. You just don't realize it.
Exactly. I didn't realize that my life changed on that trip, and now I
Right.
have a tattoo to remember it by every day. It's been covered up. It's an airplane now. But a lot of these things we don't realize while we're in it.
Right.
And we don't realize like the 14th time we try something, we don't realize like, okay, this is the time it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to tell our failure stories so much more. And do we have to tell like our origin stories? Yeah, those are important. Those underdog stories, those are important.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to look at the things that are the most relatable, it's gonna be the everyday little stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's such a challenge now because of social media and everyone is sharing their highlight reel.
Right.
We need to start sharing our blooper reel.
Mm.
Because I can tell you on that 14th try how everything went right and it was perfect. But I'm leaving out those 13 attempts.
Right.
You learn one thing when you succeed. You learn how to do something right. But every time you fail, you learn a new way to do something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn a new thing that didn't work.
Wow.
And if I can tell you the 13 ways I did this wrong before I figured it out on the 14th time, I just gave you 14 pieces of information instead of just one.
Hmm.
We just don't see it as we're experiencing it. So it's almost like we have to have these out of body-esque experiences
Mm-hmm.
and look at it from the outsider's perspective. Like, what could someone else take from this?
Mm-hmm.
What could someone else learn from this? How can we make this valuable for somebody else?
Hmm. I don't think that we put that much value in that either. Because we're looking at the masses. I was talking to someone not too long ago about how they really wanted to have 100,000 followers on Instagram because they felt like one of their competitors, their competitors that had 100,000, they only had 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so they felt as though success was 100,000. And unfortunately, I think that we look at success on this macro stage, this large stage, not realizing it's one person at a time.
Yep.
That's where success is. And that person might be just the one person that's eating brunch with you or that person that's at the Walmart counter, like whatever it is. You get what I mean? I think those are things that we discount our true impact in this world, in this situation. Even listen to you talk about your story and you say, hey, I'm going to use humor. Well, a lot of people don't want to do that, right? But that's a superpower. And a lot of us have that.
This is something I actually talk about this so often because I'm a podcast producer and I teach people how to podcast and how to launch podcasts. And they have these, we say like Joe Rogan delusions of grandeur, where we're going to have like hundreds of thousands of downloads every episode right out the gate.
Right.
And no, we're not.
Right.
But you have to reframe it a little bit. And if you think of like your podcast as an arena and 20 people listen, and then you look at an arena and you see 20 people sitting in the stands, that arena is empty.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine those people are in your living room.
Right.
And you have 20 people in your living room. It is standing room only.
Right.
People are tripping over each other.
Right.
You're constantly shushing people because you can't hear.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this tendency to, like you said, we're comparing ourselves to other people. It's all the keeping up with the Joneses.
Mm-hmm.
But we're comparing ourselves in our current chapter to someone that's in a completely different book.
Right.
So is Joe Rogan getting all of these downloads on his podcast? Yes. Joe Rogan is also a celebrity and loaded and has a team and all of these other things. He's not in the same book as us.
Right.
But if we're putting out content that's impacting one person and it's changing the life of one person, I would say that's a lot better than having 100,000 downloads.
And so I'll share my quick little story,
Please.
Sarah. I'm doing this interview. I've been doing this for going on 7 years now. And there was a person I interviewed. They said, Maurice, you are the best podcast that no one's ever heard of. I said, oh, wow. That. Right. So here's what happened. I decided, you know what? I'm going to start putting myself into award shows. Mm-hmm. The very first one I enter, I win it. So in that situation, you don't discount who you are because you don't know who's with that message that you're going to put out there, who is going to touch, and the fact that I was able to step up to the plate a little bit and challenge myself, get outside of my box, Stop being an introvert. Well, my
Mhm.
perceived vision of an introvert, right? And sometimes you will reach heights that you never reached before, or that thought that you had even imagined,
Yeah.
right? And I think those are the type of things, like you said about the whole Joe Rogan thing. No, he had, like you said, he has not just a team. He signed $100 million thing with Spotify, and
Mhm.
so yeah, so he has a whole nother machine behind him
Yeah.
that some of us don't have.
Yeah.
So it's hard for us to compare, but that doesn't mean that we are less valuable in that.
And a lot of it is imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's something that I know I struggle with every day. And a lot of people do. I don't think anybody is immune to it.
Right.
But the same as you, I mean, my book, I just passed my 1 year anniversary of publishing last week, and it's won 2 awards,
Nice.
one
Congrats.
international, one national. And people are like,
Congrats.
"Oh my God, how did you become an award-winning author?" I'm like, I submitted my book to an awards show.
I know, right?
I said, "Hi, I wrote this. Can I have an award?"
Right, right.
And they looked at it and compared it to some things, and we're like, "Yeah, okay, she can have it."
Right, right.
Like, and so now I can like, I ever think I'd be able to say like I'm an award-winning author?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm pretty sure my Facebook bio right now says, just because I never thought I could say this, award-winning author. Because who am I to
Right,
be like to have that and to be able to say that? But if someone has to win this stuff,
right,
and why not you?
right. Pretty
I
much.
mean, it's kind of the same thing as like entering to win like the lottery and maybe don't spend all your money on scratch offs, but
Right,
someone's got to win it.
right. I
It might be
mean,
you.
it might be a little easier for you to win an award than it would be to win the lottery.
Depends on the award, yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. There's some awards that, again, I need a machine behind me. But
I'm probably not going to get a Grammy, but I
right.
got an International Impact Book Award.
Nice.
Ah.
Right.
Still waiting for my Tony, but
Listen.
here we are.
Right, right. But see, again, these are things that we sometimes don't, when we look at that, hey, you know what? You're an award-winning author. I'm an award-winning podcaster. Not knowing what the real story is. Not even knowing how long we've been doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because of, like you said, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Don't think our message is strong enough. I didn't think that my content was going to be that strong, to be honest. So I thank you very much for coming on, Sara, and sharing that, to letting us know and understand what the true value is in our story. And even just being able to tell it no matter what emotion we have to share, right? Because like you said, there's a whole book of it.
Yeah.
There is a whole book. I mean, if you take a look at, what's that Disney movie?
Inside Out.
Yes.
Yes.
All those emotions that the young girls go through, so all those type of things. And I understand we all deal with it on one end or the other, but I thank you very much for sharing it, that hey, we could touch all of those at some point in time.
Yeah, and thank you for having me and letting me talk about it, because I mean, I love this stuff, but I think people just need to understand that someone is winning the thing, someone is doing the
Right.
thing, someone is succeeding in the things. There's no reason why it can't be you.
Right.
And if you find value in listening to other people tell their stories, what's stopping you from telling yours? Like why can't someone find value in yours? You see it happen every day.
Right.
It can be you too.
Right. It's just another chapter in your book. Pretty much. So, but please, Sara, share with everyone where they could find you, where they could talk to you. You said you're a podcast producer too. Are you gonna help somebody produce their podcast?
I am, and as we're talking about awards, I am an award-winning podcast producer.
Congratulations!
So. my podcast production house did just win the Signal Award.
Nice,
which
congrats!
I'm really excited about. Thank you. But yeah, I do have a free gift if anyone wants. So my book is Open This Book: The Art of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders, and it is part journal. So I kind of walk through some thought exercises and writing exercises to start figuring out what your story is.
Mm-hmm.
So I separated out the journal, and it's free to download. If anyone wants some prompts to start thinking about how to tell their own story, just go to openthisjournal.com and you can download it for free. And while you're there, you'll see my socials, my contacts, all of my everything. And Happy to chat.
All right, cool. So, but Sarah, I gotta ask you one more question before I let you go.
Okay.
This is my would you rather question. I ask all my
Ooh,
guests.
Okay.
So, Sarah, and now mind you, there are no parameters. Use your imagination. Okay.
Oh, that's dangerous.
So, would you rather choose 3 doors or a fork in the road?
Okay, hold on. Am I choosing one of the 3 or do I get all 3?
It is your imagination. No
And are we
parameters.
on like that, was it like The Price is Right where some of the doors are like bonk?
It's your choice. No
Oh, gosh.
parameters. There's no right or wrong.
Okay. If it's just like you choose between having to choose from the 3 or the fork in the road, I choose the fork in the road because that's only 2 decisions.
Okay.
And then I have less choices to make, and then I just go with the one less traveled because they wrote a poem about it, so it must be true.
Okay.
So we'll do that. But if I can get all the doors, then we go with the doors.
So again, it's no parameters. You put yourself in a box, Sarah. No one said you couldn't choose all 3
This is
doors.
a lawless society. I was not meant to be in the purge. Okay, then I'm opening all the doors, and
Okay.
then I'm going to go back and take both forks in the road.
Okay, cool. No
Wow.
parameters, right? No rules. It was, but see, now here's the thing. I'm gonna tell you. I had a guest who said, once I said, no parameters, they said all the doors were glass, so they get to see what's behind the doors.
That's smart too. Yeah.
So that's why I say it was no rules. No, because there's no right or wrong.
I just want all of the options, and then once I know what they are, I will choose which one I keep, and then I will pass the rest to other people.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Sarah.
That was stressful.
It was.
It's a lot of pressure.
But again, that's part of the story, right?
Always, everything happens for a story.
Right. But I thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
No problem. And I thank you very much for listening to That Will Never Work podcast, and I'll talk to you just a little bit later.
Thanks for listening. Follow Maurice Chism on social media to stay connected and check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, that will never work. Or will it?